The year is 1600. Europe stands at the edge of transformation. Kingdoms rise. Exploration widens the world. And within candlelit chambers, the art of fashion becomes a language of power, class, and grace. The Elizabethan age, with its towering ruffs and heavy brocades, refuses to fade quietly. Even after Queen Elizabeth I's death in 1603, her influence lingers, shaping how both noble women and courtiers express themselves through fabric, color, and silhouette. Across England, France, and Spain, every fold of silk tells a story. A woman's gown, laced tight over whalebone stays, proclaims not comfort, but control. The body molded to perfection, the soul disciplined by beauty. For women of rank, the chemise remains the unseen foundation, the first whisper of modesty. Over it, stays carve the desired long waist and upright posture, an early corset of stiffened linen and whalebone. Above that, layers bloom. The embroidered bodice, dense with threads of silver and gold, sleeves puffed like clouds, and collars that rise in starched defiance, framing the face like a halo of lace. Painters of the time immortalize this divine geometry. The portrait of Elizabeth Vernon, Countess of Southampton, reveals the intimate secret of dressing. Her long-waisted pink stays peeking from beneath an unpinned waistcoat, surrounded by a cushion filled with pins. Every morning ritual was an act of transformation, a performance of status, luxury. Beyond England, the ripples of style travel through France and Spain. The French favor innovation. Medici collars unfurl around the neck like white fans, while in Spain, elegance remains stern and ceremonial. In both courts, fashion is politics, a visual declaration of national pride. To be well-dressed was to be seen was to be remembered. By 1605, as Anne of Denmark steps into the English court as queen consort, the English silhouette begins to change. She brings with her the whispers of Paris, narrower sleeves, daringly low necklines, and skirts shortened just enough to reveal the newest luxury, heeled shoes. The phrase "well-heeled" enters language, marking not just wealth, but elegance that literally rises above the ground. At the same time, in distant lands, the East India Company opens new trade routes. Ships laden with silks, spices, and rare dyes from Asia transform Europe's palette forever. Scarlets from cochineal, deep indigos from India, and shimmering gold threads from the Orient turn noble wardrobes into living galleries of global exchange. Fashion, once local, is now global. The decade closes with a shift. The rigid forms of the 1500s begin to soften. The farthingales tilt at sharper angles, sleeves narrow. Hairstyles rise in ornate towers of curls, jeweled and perfumed. The court of King James I gleams in new confidence, its courtiers dressed not merely to serve, but to dazzle. Every ribbon, pearl, and stitch becomes part of a silent competition. Who can embody the divine ideal of beauty most completely? And in that pursuit, the 1600s find their rhythm, a century where fashion is faith, and the body its cathedral. The first decade of the 1600s belonged to women who lived between two worlds, the strict
grace of the Elizabethan age and the blossoming softness of the Jacobean court. They inherited the discipline of the past, yet longed for the ease of a new century. Their clothing reflected this balance, firm in shape, yet fluid in meaning. Every gown, every thread, was a sentence in the language of power. Every ensemble began with the chemise, a whisper of linen that touched the skin before any ornament did. Above it came the stays, whalebone stiffened into purpose, cinching the body into the desired long, narrow form. They sculpted more than the waist. They shaped identity. A woman's bearing became her signature. Her posture spoke before her words ever could. These garments were both shield and symbol, restraining the body while revealing the discipline of its wearer. Over these foundations bloomed the layers of wealth: fine silk from Italy, rich velvet from Spain, and intricate English embroidery united across continents. The needle became a storyteller, painting gardens in thread, roses twined with forget-me-nots, tiny insects hidden among leaves, every stitch a secret. The more detailed the work, the higher the rank. To wear embroidery was to display hours of labor, devotion, and the wealth that could afford such patience. The bodice defined the century's vision of beauty. Tight, pointed, and perfectly symmetrical, it framed the torso like a sculpture. Pearls and metal threads shimmered beneath candlelight, forming constellations across the chest. Waistcoats, embroidered and edged with lace, offered a softer alternative, elegance in motion rather than restraint. Together, they revealed a truth of the time. The female form was not to be hidden, but to be designed. The farthingale, that wide circular frame beneath the gown, was both cage and crown. It transformed a woman's body into architecture. Its great wheel-shaped form demanded space, forcing others to bow, to part, to notice. By the middle of the decade, it tilted, its back rising higher, its front dipping lower. It was as if fashion itself began to lean forward, preparing to step into a new era. Around the face, lace reigned supreme. The rigid ruff of the 1500s gave way to the open Medici collar, soft, spread wide, and delicately starched. It no longer enclosed the wearer like armor. It framed her like art. The collar was the stage for the face, the canvas for elegance. Queen Anne of Denmark and Maria de Medici wore theirs proudly, turning their portraits into visions of gentle authority. A woman's hair in the early 1600s rose higher than ever before, braided and coiled upon pads, wrapped in ribbons, threaded with jewels and pearls. To see such hair was to witness art in motion, elaborate, fragile, and divine. Each strand carried fragrance, each curl meaning. It was not vanity, but ritual, a crown that no monarch could deny her. The palette of this decade spoke its own poetry. White symbolized virtue and purity, crimson announced courage and nobility, gold reflected divine favor, while deep black marked dignity and control. These colors were not chosen at whim. They carried social weight. To wear the wrong color before the wrong audience could offend an entire court. When Anne of Denmark entered the English court, she brought whispers of France with her, softer sleeves, daring necklines, and skirts that rose just enough to reveal heeled shoes. These heels were not for walking, they were for arrival. Every step announced presence, confidence, and new power. The English court, once wrapped in stiffness, began to move with rhythm and life. In Spain, the opposite held firm. Their noblewomen remained bound to tradition. Long sleeves, cone-shaped farthingales, and ruffs as large as the sun. Their fashion carried the weight of piety and duty, not pleasure. Where France flirted with change, Spain defended the sanctity of restraint. It was elegance shaped by silence, an aesthetic of reverence and control. Portraiture became the mirror through which these ideals survived. Anne of Denmark, draped in pearls and pale satin, Maria de Medici, luminous in lace and gold, Princess Elizabeth of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, standing proudly in tilted farthingale, her hair piled high with pearls. Each brushstroke preserved not just appearance, but aspiration. In every portrait, the sitter's clothing spoke of lineage, virtue, and the unspoken hunger to be remembered. Yet behind every jeweled sleeve lay a woman's patience, the hours spent being pinned, stitched, and laced, the weight of silk, the pressure of corsets, the stillness demanded by perfection. It was beauty as endurance, a test of grace beneath strain. To appear effortless was the greatest effort of all. In these garments lived the ambitions of a civilization. Each layer was a story, each stitch a decision. The women of the early 17th century wore their world like armor and altar both. Fashion was not vanity, it was survival, hierarchy, and hope sewn in silk. They did not simply dress to be seen, they dressed to be remembered. At the dawn of the 1600s, a man's clothing was his armor in a world built on rank and respect. Every button, every thread spoke of command and control. Where a noblewoman's fashion whispered grace, a nobleman's attire declared hierarchy. It was not only about appearance, it was about presence. In the court of King James I, style was diplomacy, and a well-dressed man was already halfway to influence. The doublet remained the centerpiece of male fashion, tight-fitting, tailored close to the body, and often padded for a bold, heroic shape. Gone was the exaggerated peascod belly of the 1500s. The silhouette now stood proud and natural. The finest doublets were made of satin or brocade, embroidered in silver or gold, and lined with hidden layers of linen. Each seam was a statement of precision, each stitch a symbol of authority. Beneath the doublet, fine shirts of white linen peeked through, their collars edged with lace, subtle, elegant, and deliberate. Over the doublet came the jerkin, sleeveless, often cut from velvet or leather and sometimes left unbuttoned to reveal the rich work beneath. It added depth and texture to a man's attire while allowing glimpses of embroidery and jewels hidden below. Some jerkins were adorned with small jeweled buttons or slashed to show colorful linings underneath. Though soon to fade from fashion, in the early years of the century it still represented refinement, a final echo of the Elizabethan night. Around the neck, the once rigid ruff began to relax. By 1600, it gave way to softer, lace-edged collars, first standing high and later falling gently over the shoulders. The falling band became a mark of cultured taste, its edges often embroidered or trimmed with lace so fine it caught the light like frost. It framed the face not as armor, but as elegance, a quiet transformation from command to sophistication. Below the waist, fashion evolved quickly. Trunk hose, short padded breeches remained in favor at the start of the decade, often worn with fitted canyons at the thighs. But by mid-decade, longer breeches called Venetians or slops became the mark of refinement. They were less rigid, allowing movement, comfort, and grace. Stockings of white silk or fine wool covered the legs, held by ribbon garters tied just below the knee. Sometimes so intricate they became art themselves. Color and ornamentation men's fashion in this decade was anything but dull. Deep jewel tones, crimson, emerald, midnight blue, were favored by the young and daring, while older courtiers leaned toward black, silver, and gold. Embroidery decorated every surface, from the seams of a doublet to the cuffs of gloves. Seed pearls, metallic thread, and even small gemstones were stitched into fabrics. It was a time when wealth was not hidden. It was worn with pride. No man of rank appeared without his sword. It was both weapon and ornament, hanging elegantly at the hip, its hilt often jeweled or gilded. Gloves of white or soft tan leather completed the image, sometimes embroidered, sometimes perfumed, always symbolic of honor. Feathered hats, wide-brimmed and dramatic, cast shadows that made men appear both mysterious and noble. Each accessory was more than fashion. It was a language of presence, respect, and confidence. At the start of the 1600s, men's shoes evolved alongside women's. Heels appeared for the first time in masculine fashion, small and square, adding height and authority. Shoes were made of velvet or soft leather, fastened with a bow or buckle across the instep. Some bore subtle patterns pressed into the surface, understated luxury for those who could afford it. The term well-heeled was born from these very steps. King James I himself set the tone for noble fashion, modest yet rich, firm yet refined. His portraits showed doublets heavy with pearls, slashed sleeves, and falling lace collars framing his proud features. He embodied the ideal of the 1600s nobleman, powerful, learned, and conscious of every detail in dress. The courtiers followed, transforming clothing into silent competition. To dress better than one's rival was to rise without speaking a word. Beyond England, the picture shifted slightly. In the Netherlands, men favored dark colors and austere designs, dignity over display. In France, brighter tones and softer cuts hinted at the flamboyance that would soon define the century. In Spain, however, formality ruled supreme. Black velvet, rigid collars, and the unbending grace of the old empire. Each country's fashion mirrored its spirit, restraint, romance, or pride. No matter the region, the message was the same. Clothing was not merely worn, it was commanded. It carried the weight of family, fortune, and fate. To appear perfectly composed was to be untouchable. A torn glove, a loose button, an unkempt collar could undo reputation faster than rumor. Men of the 1600s lived within the fabric of expectation, dressed, literally, for power. As the decade closed, the silhouette of men's fashion grew more balanced, no longer exaggerated, but elegant. The lines between armor and art blurred. A man could be both warrior and poet, scholar and knight, all through the cut of his coat and the grace of his stance. These were not just clothes. They were identities stitched in silk and steel. In the candlelight of the 17th century, fashion was more than vanity. It was the reflection of a world that worshipped control, dignity, and the beauty of order. In the early 1600s, childhood was not yet a separate world. It was an apprenticeship for adulthood. A noble child was dressed not for play but for presentation. Fashion shaped them early, teaching grace, posture, and obedience before words could. Children's clothing was not designed for comfort, but imitation. Boys and girls wore scaled-down versions of their parents' garments. Stiff collars, brocade sleeves, and lace ruffs as grand as any monarch's. Their shoes clicked against marble floors, their movements rehearsed like ceremony. Even youth carried the weight of status. Every garment was a lesson in lineage, Fine fabric spoke of family rank, while embroidery told the story of inheritance. A prince's tiny doublet or a young lady's farthingale was more than fashion. It was prophecy. In silk and lace, they wore their future. Portraits of promise painters captured these children not in play, but in poise. Young heirs stood beside parents in mirrored attire, their faces solemn, their posture disciplined. Their clothes announced what their lives were destined to become, reflections of power, crafted in miniature. In the candlelight of the 1600s, even innocence was dressed in expectation. A child's gown or doublet was not a costume of joy. It was the uniform of destiny. Fashion shaped them early, and in doing so shaped the centuries to come. Every century has its icons, figures who don't just wear fashion, but become it. In the early 1600s, beauty and power were stitched together, inseparable and eternal. To dress magnificently was not vanity. It was politics, persuasion, and survival all at once. The Queen of Reinvention. When Anne of Denmark arrived at the English court, she brought more than royal blood. She brought transformation. Her gowns were whispers of France and echoes of the Renaissance, blending boldness with grace. She shortened hems, revealed jeweled shoes, and softened the stiffness of the Elizabethan look. To her, elegance was freedom wrapped in silk. Every pearl she wore shone with quiet defiance. A queen who ruled through refinement, not decree. The art of grandeur across the channel, Maria de Medici embodied another ideal. Her fashion was not gentle. It was magnificent. She embraced the Medici collar like a crown of lace and light, her portraits radiating gold and confidence. Her image declared what France would soon become, the stage of European fashion. In every painting, she stands unyielding, regal, the embodiment of divine luxury. Anne Vavasour's name carried scandal and fascination in equal measure. From imprisonment to influence, her life was stitched with rebellion. Her portraits tell a story no words could. Once dressed in black and white under Elizabeth's rule, later glowing in white satin beside Queen Anne of Denmark herself. Her beauty was her weapon, her attire, her shield. Through silk and lace, she transformed disgrace into legend. Painters like John de Kritz, Peter Paul Rubens, and Franz Pourbus captured these women not just as subjects, but as symbols. Their portrait turned fabric into memory and fashion into immortality. Through oil and pigment, they preserved a world where a hemline or ruff could define destiny. In their art, the stillness of a gown spoke louder than words. As the 1600s unfolded, the exaggerated shapes of the past softened into elegance and movement. The farthingale gave way to the flowing skirt, the rigid ruff to gentle lace. Yet, the spirit of the age never faded. The belief that clothing could express identity, power, and soul remained unbroken. From these roots, modern fashion inherited its oldest truth: appearance is influence. The women and men of the early 17th century did not simply follow trend as they built them. They transformed fabric into power, beauty into legacy. Their portraits still breathe in galleries today, their garments long turned to dust, yet their presence endures. Because fashion in every century is not about fabric or form. It is about immortality. And in the silent glow of history's candlelight, they are still standing, proud, poised, eternal.